Thank you so much for staying and for this warm round of applause for the team. I'm going to bring back the director of the film, Eliza Hittman. And we're really, really thrilled to have a lot of special guests that are going to join us on stage. Do you want to bring them?
Yeah, come on up. We have Dave and Frank and Harris and Maddie here.
Dave, Frank, Harris, and Maddie. Are we missing anyone?
No, I think we're okay.
Oh, that's good.
I would also like to say that this is...
Don't sit on the same chair, it's okay.
This is a local production, and we have a tremendous amount of our crew here today, so I would love it if our crew could stand up. Nick Yun, our AC, Luke Provenzano, our second AC, and Lion Taylor, our gaffer is here, and Lucy Munger, our line supervisor, our script supervisor is here. Thank you all for coming out.
I'm just going to ask maybe a few questions to you and everyone on stage, and then we can open it up. Since we have the entire, a big part of the cast, maybe we can start by talking about how you met Harris, and then Maddie and the beach rats, just so they can participate in the conversation from the beginning.
Yeah, I guess that the casting process was a hybrid, I would say, of a traditional indie casting process as well as a non-traditional casting process. Harris came in through in LA. He was in the first session of casting tapes that we received for the film, and he came in through an LA management office, and I was sort of like, oh, I don't really know if I want to cast somebody from LA, because this is such a New York film. And then in his video, he was very, very compelling. And the first thing that he said in the video was, "Hey, my name is Harris, Dickinson. I'm 6'3". And he had a very kind of compelling audition. And then I found out he was British, and he had snuck in through his management company. And I had a bigger crisis, I would say, because I didn't know.
I'm British from LA, but stuff.
Yes, I didn't know I could cast somebody from the outskirts of London for this film. And I guess I can talk about all of them, and then they can talk about how they found the project. Maddie over here is a very talented actress, and she was also part of our first kind of casting sessions. And I looked her up immediately and did some research and found out that she was in a Broadway production of The Real Thing, right out of Northwestern and from New York. And was really sort of captivated by her audition, which was, very seductive but sort of natural, I would say, and very talented. And Frank and Dave, do you want to talk about sort of how you came to the production?
I was hanging out on the beach one day, smoking and drinking with my friends, and then two weird people came up to me asking if I wanted to be in a movie. I was like, cool, no doubt.
Yeah, I sort of don't remember, so I would say the process was very subtle, so yeah.
So we had a non-traditional sort of part of this process, where I grew up in Brooklyn, and I went to like a massive public high school called Edward R. Murrow that's sort of smack in the middle, and I grew up in Flatbush, in the 80s and the 90s, and overlapped and intersected with kids, from mostly what we call now South Brooklyn. And the sort of kind of line, I guess the cutoff would have been Park Slope, so the majority of the people that I knew were from Canarsie and Manhattan Beach and all these other places. So I had sort of pre-scouted locations where I wanted people who were helping cast the film, and I'd say, go to this, handball court around this time, and it was, early, summer, June, I would say, and, I had very specific kind of character descriptions that had a few students who were helping on the production who helped kind of take videos, and, they were sort of the same age as the kids, and were able to talk to them and invite them to audition.
I mean, Brooklyn is nearly like part of the cast. I mean, you've worked in Brooklyn, you just mentioned it, but it's really typically a part of Brooklyn you don't really see in films, so it was great to bring people from also different side of Brooklyn. I mean, Coney Island a little bit, but I think it's shot mostly like maybe Shipside Bay and Garrison Beach.
It's shot all over. Just to give you a little bit of context, a beach rat is somebody who specifically is from Garrison Beach. And
so you are from Garrison?
No,
No?
Frank
from
is.
Manhattan Beach.
You're from.
We're all neighbors of the neighborhood, yeah.
A beach rat is somebody who's specifically from Garrison Beach, and it's an area that has like one access road, and it was actually really devastated in Sandy because there was only one access road. And I initially wanted to shoot there, but it's not such a warm environment actually, so we sort of shot all over, I would say. And a kid from Garrison Beach has a certain texture, and they all kind of share similar characteristics. Like a lot of them come from broken homes, have lost parents, and have sort of headed down a specific track. And it's a pattern, I would say. And there's a lot of meth, which was in earlier versions of the script, but was sort of taken out. But there's a lot of sort of hard kind of drugs, and they're kind of far from the train, so there isn't so much motivation, I would say. And there's a stagnancy, and an isolation, I think, that comes when you sort of live in, an area that's a bit removed from the subway. But it is sort of a local slang term for a certain kind of kid. But also what I was thinking about was that there is still a lot of cruising that happens along the water, and I was just thinking about the title in terms of relationship to like what happens during the night and what happens during the day.
You talked about finding everyone. I would like to hear from you about your experience working in the film and when you met with Eliza.
Yeah, as Eliza said, I sent my tape through, was it beginning of summer? And I spend a lot of time sitting in my room in my mum's house, putting myself on tape for projects, and they kind of go into like this abyss that you don't really know where they're going, and you have no concept of who's watching them or if they're even getting watched. And the annoying thing with when I read this script is that I loved it so much, and you have that lack of control with projects. You're not in charge of your own destiny a lot of times in the parts that you get. So I loved it so much, and I was really passionate about it, but I knew that it was kind of out of my hands, so I just tried my best, and it was really refreshing to read a character that was so well-rounded and had a really interesting struggle going on, and something that a challenge that I could rise to, in terms of the cultural difference of who he is, and I mean, I'm from London, and to step into a movie that is about a very specific a part of Brooklyn was kind of intimidating in a sense, but it didn't feel so far away from my area and my friends that I know and friends of friends. So it was kind of just a matter of trying to transfer them differences into like a Brooklyn equivalent almost. But yeah, I put myself on tape, and then me and Eliza had a really great Skype session. I was teaching some kids at the time at a local drama school, and I remember like my manager called me and was like, "You've got this Skype session in like 10 minutes," so I had to like leave the kids for a bit. They were supervised, it was fine. But I had to like go upstairs, and I remember I was just like really excited by it, and I wasn't nervous. I was just really looking forward to getting talking to you. In the time that had lapsed between the audition and the Skype call, I'd watched It Felt Like Love, and I got a sense for the tone of the movie and your style. So yeah, I kind of just really hoped it would go further, and it did. I ended up shooting it and getting a visa, and it all worked out beautifully, and I'm very grateful, yeah.
Yeah, you got your visa just on time.
I did.
Maddie, would you also like to talk about your experience on working on the film and with Eliza?
Yeah, I had a kind of, I guess, similar experience to Harris in that I read the script and immediately loved it. I could just see it immediately, and I guess that's a sign for me that I've connected to something. But when I read it, the character didn't feel like an immediate fit. And also, I think Eliza's work is so sparse, which is what I love about it, but coming from theater, which is a much, I don't know, more like verbal medium. It was a very different kind of project, but I just fell in love with it, and the idea that it's a female director and DP was really exciting. And so many of these movies, I think, when it's a male protagonist with a girlfriend, it's like so clearly the girl. And even though this is so sparse, somehow reading it, I understood her and I felt her, and I thought she had somehow a lot more agency than a lot of scripts would allow this person, which excited me, I guess. Yeah.
It's very well written, but I assume it's very specific in the dialogue. Do you allow for improvisation or changes with the actor, or are you very strict?
I mean, I think that there are scenes that are sort of structured, and written, like you were taught to write a scene, and then there are scenes that are just, there to sort of let the narrative breathe. And those are scenes where I would just let people talk, and we would just catch things that they were saying, and but it's not really an improvised, process for me. I would have liked to have been able to let it breathe even more, but it was so tight, the type of schedule that it was for the production. So I think, that there's always a fantasy when you find all these interesting people, that have, it really sort of not only like visually complex faces, but also interesting personalities. It's a balance, because you want to be able to bring them out more than you've written, but also the timing, and the time of the actual runtime of the script is always prohibitive. There is, one other character who's not here, who wanted to be here today, Anton, who sort of fills out the group, and Anton particularly has, a very interesting story, and it's like hard to sort of find ways to sort of integrate it in, I guess, but it wasn't possible, and I think that the narrative is like, it doesn't have any point of view breaks, and it's mostly really about, building the audience's relationship to the main character.
Well, I think you can let them speak on the DVD extra, and they can just tell their stories if they want to speak more. Maddie just mentioned it, the cinematography. So you worked with Hélène Louvart, who's worked, Wim Wenders, and I think Claire Denis.
Yes, and I have a good friend here who's here tonight, Tim Sutton, and she shot his beautiful film called Dark Night, which I have a tremendous amount of respect for. And when I heard that she was shooting it, and I was also a big fan of Eliza Hittman's films, that she had shot it, and he connected us. And we began sort of Skyping about the project, and I had some very specific sort of visual references for the film, that she was interested in. And some of those references were just appropriated Facebook images from Kids from Garrettson Beach, which is the opening montage of the film, was just an appropriated, Facebook image that I had grabbed. And then there was also a photographer named Danny Fitzgerald, who did a lot of kind of sort of erotic male photography from the 60s in Carroll Gardens, and he had a book called Brooklyn Boys And I sort of
Brooklyn
was
Boys with a Z?
no, with an S, with an S. He had a studio in his apartment in Carroll Gardens and did a beautiful job of sort of capturing men in the neighborhood. And that was sort of also a reference. And then there was a film that I saw here a while ago called White Epilepsy, which is a Philippe Grandrieux film. Grandrieux, I'm going to mispronounce it. Did I do that right?
No, Grandrieux.
Grandrieux.
I'm usually the one mispronouncing names, so you know.
That, was it was lit entirely in frontal light. And there was something very, sort of body horror-ish about that installation or video piece that was intriguing to me. And also some other photographs we were looking at by Barbara Crane also all had this frontal light, which is sort of not conventional for film photography. And we were really sort of thinking about, like, could we shoot this whole film with frontal light? And it was sort of came from the title in a way. It was like catching an animal if you had a flashlight in the darkness. And while we were preparing the film, everybody got nervous because we were only going to use one light in the darkness, mounted on a stick. And Hélène very beautifully kind of came to my defense. And she was like, look, everybody, we could put a light here and it would be the moon, and we could put a light here and it would be the street light. And she was like, but we will not do any of those things. And she said, why? Because it's cinema. So it was something, that sort of stuck, with me. And it's like, the light comes from the same place as the soundtrack. I don't know. You can make those choices. And Hélène and I spent some time at different cruising spots along the water and observing activity, I guess. And, one thing that was sort of intriguing was that it was just in total darkness. So we were thinking about how we could sort of work with total darkness. And we decided to shoot on Super 16 because we wanted the film to have sort of a timeless feeling, which I think it's a story that has a timeless feeling and also an area that's sort of trapped in time. And also, all these digital cameras are so phenomenal and how light sensitive they are. And we were like, we don't want the sensitivity to the light. We wanted to sort of be able to shape the darkness.
It's beautiful, shaping the darkness.
Yes.
That's cinema. We have time for one or two questions, so... oh, yeah, sorry, yes? So this viewer loves the film, and she was asking you about the close-up, and if you knew, at what point you knew what you were going to use.
Well, I shot I have one other feature that I made. It's a micro-budget film, and with that film, I only had time to use sort of one lens, and it ended up being like a longer lens, and we shot very, very close because we didn't have any money to kind of control the environment, and it's sort of stuck, I think, in the way that I approach thinking about shooting. And when I talked to Hélène initially, I said, Hélène, I need to open up the world in this film more, and I didn't end up really opening up the world very much, even though it was part of my intention. It ended up being quite confined, which I guess, says something about, the worlds and the stories that I'm sort of exploring at this moment.
Yes?
Yeah, I mean, sure.
Everybody heard the question? Yes?
Why, as a woman, would I dare tell a story about a man or a young person
Male bodies.
who's male? I think for me, I grew up in a world that was very, 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 very homophobic. And, I wrote something a number of years ago that was more specific to my family, and I got in a lot of trouble for writing it. And nobody spoke to me, for a year. So I always knew that I would tell some sort of story about a world in which there was no coming out, you know, or there was no clear way that that would happen. You know, and that was something that I always knew at some point I would, you know, make a film about. And yes, you know, as a woman, I did do some research. It did dawn on me to look at some websites that are available to the general population, you know. And I think that the internet, you know, regardless of whether you're a man or a woman, you know, it can be an erotic place when you're coming of age, and that's, you know, for both sexes, I think. You know, and a lot of my work, you know, for the film that I've already made and the film that I'm showing here tonight explores a very specific intersection between sex and violence. You know, and I was going down sort of a rabbit hole of thinking about real crimes that happen in the world, you know, and you know, how it's sort of like this pattern of violence that people don't particularly want to think about or address, you know. And I think that for me, you know, I was thinking about how destructive from my own experiences it is to grow up, you know, in a world, you know, and how destructive it is to hide who you are within a family, within a society, you know, within a community. And, you know, I think it's, you know, it's important for women to be able to tell stories that interest them in the same way that men tell stories that interest them.
Absolutely. Yeah. You have your special water?
I have a special water from across
We
the
bring
street.
the beer for the 9 o'clock, and at midnight it's vodka, but you know. So. We have to wrap it up. I'm really sorry. I wish we had more time to talk, but thank you so much for coming, and thank you so much for sharing the film.
Thank you.
Thank you.